This is Devin Sanchez, and this kid is not only a 5-star recruit, but he is also a top 10 overall player in the class of 2025, officially establishing himself out of high school as the #1 cornerback in the nation. This kid plays an excellent man or zone coverage, and he definitely isn't afraid to get physical. He reminds a lot of people of New England Patriots young cornerback Christian Gonzalez. And just like him, Devin Sanchez is looking to prove over the next few years that he is one of the best defensive backs in all of football. So today, I am putting Devin Sanchez into College Football 25. Let's see how this dude's career might turn out in college as we'll follow him on his road to glory. Now, coming out of high school as one of the top-rated players, Devin Sanchez knows that one of his main goals should be to make it to the league. So all he has to do now is just pick what college he's going to, and his recruiting has been going on for a couple of years now. So he was going to have plenty of options to choose from. And ultimately, when it came to Devin Sanchez's college decision, he decided to sign with Ohio State. As soon as Devin Sanchez announced that he was going to be a Buckeye, he was ready to get to work. He was able to graduate high school early, allowing him to spend more time with the team before his freshman season. And he was definitely doing a lot of interviews, but he was already out there practicing and getting used to the college level early. And he was even more motivated to get to work once he saw that Ohio State had actually won the national championship. And he was hoping that in his freshman season, he's able to help bring the Buckeyes back to that same level of glory. So now going into his freshman year, it turns out that none of the numbers that he wants are available, so he decides to go with 3. And all throughout fall camp, Devin Sanchez was showing the coaches that he might have a chance to make an impact on the field already. This kid was very solid and technically sound, but he was still a freshman. And going into the first game of the season against UConn, it turns out that Devin did not play a single down throughout the afternoon. And Devin realized that he had some serious work to do if he had any plans of ever touching the field this season. So he was out there working hard to upgrade his skills before the coaches told him that he might have a chance to move up. And when he finally got that chance, he was showing the coaches that he had some versatility. He could not only go out there and lock stuff down, but he was also proving to be real physical when he had to be. So the coaches decided to move him up the depth chart to the 4th string corner, and he was hoping that meant that he would start getting some more playing time, but that was not necessarily the case, as Devin was not put in until the last play of the game. Where Ohio State pretty much had this game wrapped up, but they definitely put an end to it after they intercept this pass, and now Ohio State was taking down their first ranked opponent of the year, as they go on to close this game out 31-24. But it looks like they're about to make some changes as Devin Sanchez was getting another opportunity to move up the depth chart. And this was not something that Devin was going to take for granted, as he genuinely felt like he could make an impact for this team. And it seems like so did the coaches, as they were now moving him up to the 3rd string cornerback. And now Devin finally knows that he's going to have a real chance to make his college football debut. And he's definitely hoping it'll be a good one, as in their next game, they'll be staying at home to face off against Ohio. Devin Sanchez would make his first real college football debut halfway through the second quarter, and he was already making an impact as he bursted into the backfield for a tackle for loss. And apparently that seemed to set the tone for Ohio State, as they would come up with a sack on their next play. Now they would end up taking Devin out at the 2-minute warning, and they did not put him back in until the 4th quarter, where Ohio State was still down by 7 points. And despite the fact that none of these plays really went his way, Devin Sanchez was still running to the ball and helped contribute to a stop. Regardless though, this turned out to be a game where Ohio State would lose, taking their first L of the season against an in-state opponent, 27-17. Now this was beyond an embarrassing loss for Ohio State. These guys were the defending national champions, and they just lost to a team that probably won't even get a bowl game. So the coaches realized that maybe it's time to make some changes, and it turns out that Devin Sanchez might be one of them, as he was getting yet another chance to move up the depth chart. And once again, he was proving to the coaches that he had potential to be a very quality player. So the coaches decided that it was time to finally move Devin up to a starter. But they were not going to take it easy on him because he was a freshman. They had a big time game coming up, and if they were going to start him, they needed to know that they could trust him out there on the field. So now Devin Sanchez was heading into what felt like the biggest game of his life. As in his first game as a starter, he would be at home playing against top 25 ranked Penn State. Now this game would get off to a great start, as Ohio State's defense was coming up with a pick early on, coming up with the turnover as Penn State was about to put up some points, but Ohio State would give the ball right back. And with Penn State already in position to score, they took Devin Sanchez off the field and put him back in after Penn State already went up by 7. And with Penn State's offense doing a great job moving up and down the field, Devin Sanchez knew that at some point he was going to have to make a play. So on this 3rd down and 6, he is playing excellent man coverage before reading the opponent's route and saying, "Wang!" Coming up with his first pick of his college football career. And just like that, Devin Sanchez, the true freshman, is giving his team some life here heading into the second half. And it's crazy because to start the second quarter, Penn State thought it was a good idea to test Devin Sanchez as he was coming up with another pick. He brought this ball all the way back to the opposite side of the field, and now things were looking good for Ohio State. As now in the 3rd quarter, Ohio State had the lead 14-7. But by the 4th quarter, things would begin to change as Penn State was now crossing over the goal line to tie this game up at 14. And despite having a good game, the coaches realized that maybe they shouldn't leave Devin Sanchez out there on an island so early in his career, because with no help over the top, he was getting cooked for a touchdown. And now eventually this game was heading into overtime, where once again this Ohio State defense would let up another score, and just like that, they had done enough to lose back-to-back games, as Ohio State would drop another one 28-21. But despite taking the loss, Devin Sanchez felt pretty good about his performance, as he came up with 2 interceptions in his first game as a starter. And it's safe to say that he was definitely getting a lot of support from fans online. Many people knew what kind of potential Devin could have, and it seemed like the coaches knew as well, as he was finally earning the chance to become the #1 cornerback for Ohio State, and being somebody who couldn't wait for the day that he could become a great player for this team. He did not waste this opportunity, as he was now officially the full-time starter. This kid had earned the trust of the entire program, and they were now counting on him to help lead this defense going forward throughout the rest of the year, because now Ohio State had to get back on track, and it was not going to be easy going into their next game, as they were now heading on the road to face off against Illinois. Now, after letting up quite a bit of yards, Ohio State would eventually come up with a sack on 3rd down that forced Illinois to a field goal. But in a game where Ohio State's offense was playing horrible, their defense had to pick up for the slack. Unfortunately, though, that was not the case early on, as Illinois was now getting in the end zone for a touchdown, putting them up by 2 possessions in this game. Things would start looking up, though, towards the end of the second quarter, as Ohio State would end up holding them to 3 before the second half, and after halftime, they were coming up with a stop on 3rd down that now allowed Ohio State to take the lead. And now here in the 4th quarter, Illinois was trying to come up with another score. But it turns out that Devin Sanchez had other ideas. He snags his ball out the air before heading the other way, and now Ohio State is in a great position. And this game would eventually come down to less than a minute left, with Ohio State still having the lead, and Illinois still trying to score a touchdown with no timeouts. But unfortunately, they proved that they had still not learned their lesson, as Devin Sanchez comes up with another pick. He damn near covered 2 guys in this play and still made the interception, forcing a turnover that goes on to give Ohio State another win on their season, as Ohio State was finally getting back on track with a 25-20 victory over Illinois. And thanks to Devin Sanchez, who had 2 interceptions in some of the biggest moments of this game, people were starting to look at Ohio State as a team that was not going to be fun to play against. But after dropping 2 games early on in the year, Ohio State is still looking to prove that they can dominate teams. And they're hoping they can do exactly that going into their next game at home against the UCLA Bruins. Now to start this game, Devin Sanchez was reminded that he definitely had a lot of work to do. He got cooked early on a play that led to this 1st and goal, where UCLA was easily getting across the goal line for a score. So things were not looking great for Ohio State early on, but eventually they would take a 10-7 lead. Unfortunately, that would not last long though, as they would end up getting scored on a huge play downfield, now allowing UCLA to take the lead, and they would maintain it going into the second half. But on this 3rd down and 9, Devin Sanchez realized that he had to make a play, or else his team would fall too far behind. So on this play, he dropped back into coverage before reading that route and saying, "Wang!" Coming up with a huge pick down on the sideline, and the entire crowd is hyped, because now Ohio State takes a 24-21 lead before coming out on defense and getting another pick, forcing a turnover that now allows them to go up by 2 possessions in this game. And in a performance where Devin Sanchez was clamping up all throughout, it's no surprise that Ohio State would go on to win back-to-back games, closing this one out 31-28. And Ohio State's got to be feeling good about their true freshman, who came up with another interception in a 3rd straight game. This kid was clearly a different kind of player, as quarterbacks were realizing that it was not a good idea to throw to his side. I mean, it was wild to think that as a freshman, he had a chance to break the all-time single-season record for Ohio State's interceptions, as he was definitely on pace with his 5 picks already. But one thing about Devin Sanchez, though, is that he knew not to get complacent, man. He had a long season to go. And in his mind, he still hasn't proved a damn thing. At this point, he's just focused on helping Ohio State go on a 3-game streak with another win against Rutgers. Now in this game, Devin Sanchez was playing extremely patient, but on this play he got snagged on even though he was playing great defense. But it was all good though, because Devin Sanchez had a feeling that he was going to make up for that. And it's crazy because on this 3rd down and 6, he was out there saying thank you, as he came up with a huge pick at the end of the half that takes points off the board for Rutgers and gives Ohio State a ton of momentum going into the second half. And in the 3rd quarter, this man Devin was still playing excellent defense. But it was not just him though, as Ohio State had only scored 3 points throughout the entire game, ultimately leading to late in the 4th quarter where Rutgers had a chance to take the lead, but that was before Ohio State would come up with another pick, as the defense plucks this ball out the air and allows Ohio State to just barely escape another game, as this game would literally end 3-0 for Ohio State. And this seemed like a game where Devin Sanchez felt like he had to do everything to keep them alive. But luckily, as a true freshman, he did not always have to feel like that, as there were other games where he didn't have to do nearly as much to help his team succeed. Like one against Washington, where all of the Ohio State offense was struggling, their defense had come up with a pick and returned it all the way to the other side of the field for a touchdown, turning out to already do enough to win this game, as Ohio State would close this one out 10-7. Literally had a defense that put up more points than the offense, which was definitely a big issue for Devin Sanchez, by the way. He didn't like how often his offense had let him down this season. He was just letting it go for now because Ohio State was on a big winning streak. But he knew that if his offense was not going to play up to their standard, he was just going to have to play above his own and do whatever it took to keep Ohio State's winning streak alive. Now, it almost took an entire half for Ohio State to put up 7 points and for Wisconsin to match it, as they put up a score that ties this game up at 7 before Ohio State takes the lead. And it looks like both sides of the ball have some cohesiveness to it, as the defense is coming up with a big play as well. I mean, Devin Sanchez had been locking stuff up in the biggest moments for his team all season, and that did not stop on the 2nd down and 10, as he would go up and say, "Wang!" snagging his ball out of the sky and taking it out of the end zone for a huge return the other way. This man was gliding downfield and set his team up with a chance to put up some more points before half. But Devin Sanchez looked like he was not going to stop there, because in the 3rd quarter, man, it seemed like Devin Sanchez was all over the field. I mean, it didn't matter what coverage he was in, he was finding the football, coming up with an interception where the quarterback was just trying to throw out of a sack. And all of a sudden, he got his team up 2 possessions going into the 4th quarter. And I think it's safe to say that this was obviously already crazy. I mean, this kid is literally just a true freshman, but after they got to this 3rd and 6 deep in their own territory, this dude Devin Sanchez was saying, "Give me that." But it wasn't just that, because he also said, "Hey," after he picked off his 3rd pass of the game. And obviously 3 picks for anybody is absolutely insane, but especially for a freshman, which made it even more crazier when it came down to this 1st and goal with less than a minute left, where after playing great defense on this play, Devin Sanchez saw the ball coming his way and said, "Wang!" Not only coming up with his 4th pick of the day, but this time he was heading all the way to the crib for a touchdown. His first one of his college football career, and he couldn't even believe he was doing this at the highest level. But oh boy, it's real. He came up with the score that gave Ohio State their first dominant win of the season, as they go on to beat Wisconsin 28-7. And of course, for player of the game, who else but Devin Sanchez, who caught 4 interceptions, scored a touchdown, and even had a pass deflection. It was no surprise to anybody that he would go on to win not only his first Big Ten Player of the Week, but National Defensive Player of the Week. The kid was absolutely different, and it seemed like he was proving it every week. The crazy thing about it is that he was still just a freshman, so he is really only just getting better, which makes it even more mind-boggling to know that he had already broken the single-season record for Ohio State's interceptions. This kid was receiving love from fans all over the country, and it was very clear that he had become the next big superstar for Ohio State. But this team still had a job to finish. They were in the middle of defending a national title, and they had no time to slow down, going into their next game against Minnesota. Now, in this game, as you're about to see, this dude Devin Sanchez was not slowing down. I mean, I don't know if he got a magnet in his helmet or something that just brings him to the ball every play, but this dude was doing some wild stuff. Like, I bet you thought that pick was cool, right? Like, he had done that a few times this season, right? Like, that was pretty cool. But I'll tell you right now, it was crazy when he came out here on his 1st down and 10. And he went up to this one dude and said, "Shablang, boy, what you doing, boy?" Oh, hell no. See, that boy got knocked into next Tuesday. I mean, this play looks exactly like that time Denzel Ward said, "Wang." Oh, come on, look at, oh, see that? Oh, hell no, bro. That's crazy. This dude, Devin Sanchez, had the entire stadium on their feet. And he also had Ohio State on their way to another win on the year, as they closed this game out 13-7. And he was once again earning himself another player of the game. Devin Sanchez was already considered to be one of the best cornerbacks in the nation, possibly even one of the greatest cornerbacks that Ohio State has already ever seen. And in the game against Purdue, he was continuing to prove so, as he was out there forcing another fumble for the 2nd straight week. ultimately helping his team come up with another 14-6 victory. And now with Ohio State once again being a top 10 team in the country, they were definitely in great position, especially with their new star players still getting better throughout the year. But they still had some work to do as the college football playoffs were right around the corner. And now currently sitting outside the conference championship game, Ohio State knew that going into the final game of the regular season, that it was a must win. And if they wanted any chance at getting a bye week, they would have to come up with a win in their final game of the year, as they were now heading on the road to face off against their biggest rival, the Michigan Wolverines. Now to start this game off, this defense was actually playing very well. This dude Devin Sanchez was running all the way across field to make tackles, eventually leading to this 3rd down and 5 where the quarterback gets sacked in the backfield, and it looks like Ohio State was in great position before the offense turns the ball over. And now Michigan is right down at the goal line trying to punch it in. And after this play, the coaches decide to take Devin Sanchez out, and he comes back in with Michigan not only having the lead, but they were right back down at the goal line after Ohio State turns the ball over again. It felt like in the biggest game of the year, this offense was completely letting the defense down. And it was only getting worse after Devin Sanchez lets up a touchdown here on this play. So at this point now, Michigan had the lead by 14, and things were not looking good for Ohio State. But eventually though, Devin knew that he would have to make a play. So on this 3rd down and 10, he dropped back into coverage before snagging his ball out the air, and coming up with a pick that was hopefully giving his team some life going forward. But although Ohio State was not able to put up any points after half, Devin Sanchez was giving them another chance after he comes up with another stop on 3rd down. But unfortunately by the 4th quarter, Ohio State still had no points on the board. Devin Sanchez was not giving up though, as he said, "Wang," coming up with his 2nd pick of the day, and at this point it seems like he was the only bright spot for the entire team. The kid had tried his best all day to keep coming up with plays, but eventually Michigan would actually score another touchdown, doing enough to extend the Wolverine lead to 3 possessions and give the Buckeyes another loss on their season, as they end up getting blown out 21-0. And with this being the final game of the regular season, they now have no chance of making the conference championship, and they'll still have to wait and see if they made the college football playoffs. But at this point, the season is now over, and it's time for some awards to be given out. And now it turns out that a receiver from Clemson actually goes on to win the Heisman, the first receiver to win it since Alabama's Devontae Smith. And that was pretty cool, but it was also cool to see that Devin Sanchez had become the first freshman ever to be awarded the best defensive back in the nation. This kid had clearly been on another level throughout the entire season, and it would show as he won a bunch of other awards. And as far as the season stats, man, the kid had an incredible year. 13 interceptions is actually one shy from the all-time single-season record. But at this point, Devin is not too worried about his stats anymore, because it turns out that Ohio State will have a chance to play in the college football playoffs, where their first matchup is easily going to be their toughest one throughout the entire season, as they were not only heading on the road, but they were facing off against a Big Ten rival and a top 10 team in the country, the Oregon Ducks. Now to start this game, this dude Devin Sanchez was not scared of the moment at all. He knew exactly what he'd have to do to help his team win, so he went out there and said, "Wang," snagging his ball on the sideline and giving his team some momentum early on. Now unfortunately, Ohio State's offense would not take advantage of it, but Devin didn't seem to mind all that as he was smacking the ball free once again, forcing his 3rd fumble over the last month. Unluckily though, Oregon picks it up. Regardless though, Devin was proving that he was not here to mess around, and he would continue to show that going forward. Unfortunately, this was a game where it didn't really seem like anybody else on Ohio State was willing to show it either, as Oregon would score a touchdown that was putting them up by 7, and now by the end of half, it looks like Ohio State needs somebody other than Devin Sanchez to please put some work in. Like, god dang. It seemed like he was the only one consistently covering his man as the defense lets up another big play touchdown downfield. So things were starting to look real bad going into the second half, but Devin Sanchez was not going to take that. He went out there and said, "Shabak," smacking the running back in the backfield for a loss, and it was clear to the entire stadium that as of right now, Devin Sanchez was the best part of this entire team. I mean, the dude was out here not only guarding his own route, but also guarding his teammates' route and still coming up with the tackle. So no, it really started to seem like there was nothing Devin could do, as Oregon would find themselves across the goal line for another touchdown. But even down 21, Devin was still out there trying to make plays for his team. But with him seemingly being the only one trying, and with Oregon's offense continuously moving the chains, Devin Sanchez was so mad that he actually walked off the field with time still on the clock, as he knew that his freshman season had officially come to an end, as Oregon would go on to beat Ohio State 28-14. And despite the fact that Devin had probably the best game of his entire season, he just did not get enough help in the game that cost Ohio State the opportunity to move on to the next round. And in a season where Devin had clearly been this team's best defender, doing so much that he went on to break not only an Ohio State, but a Big Ten single-season record. This kid was definitely going to be a problem, but the problem was that he had a problem with Ohio State, and he was not the only one. There were multiple other recruits that had an issue with the way Ohio State's season has ended, and especially after a year where the offense had played absolutely atrocious, it honestly made Devin Sanchez think about entering the transfer portal, where he might be able to go to a team that has a way more competent offense and could allow him to be a part of a team where he does not have to do everything for them to win a game. But at the same time, Devin loved being a Buckeye. Which brings us to today, where I'm gonna be honest with y'all, Devin Sanchez did a lot of thinking. He proved himself to be the #1 cornerback in the country, yet the coaches decided to move him back to the 3rd string corner on the team? Yeah, man, Devin Sanchez was not playing that. Especially when the other Devin on the team was booty butt ass cheeks McGee, and he didn't get benched other than when he got injured. So yeah, Devin decided that it was time to hit the transfer portal. And now after receiving a few new offers, he was actually considering going to a school that didn't offer him at all coming out of high school. But based on their quarterback, he felt like it was the right place to go. So for Devin Sanchez's sophomore season, he decided to sign with the Florida Gators. Now, immediately after signing with Florida, they already want Devin to compete for the starting job, because they feel like with having DJ Lagway at quarterback and having some very fast receivers, well, they'll definitely be able to put up some points. But they want to make sure they have somebody out there who can really lead this defense and help lock stuff down on that side of the ball. And Devin Sanchez showed early on that he was going to be that guy. Unfortunately, though, they left this man almost no good numbers. They left him with number 12. I guess it was all good, though, because 1 + 2 = 3, which was his last number, so we going with it. But now that Devin Sanchez is officially the starting cornerback for the Florida Gators, he's about ready to get into the first game of the season, where it turns out that they will be heading on the road to face off against unranked NC State. Now, to start his career off with the Gators, he is already noticing that this defense is a lot better than Ohio State. He came out here and got a couple stops on 3rd down, including a big overthrow, where Devin Sanchez was celebrating in true DB fashion. Yeah! And by the end of the half, Florida was already up by 2 possessions. And NC State felt like they might be able to get a Hail Mary, but Devin Sanchez was out there saying, "Wang," coming up with his first pick as a Florida Gator to close out the first half. And he went right over to the NC State bench to let them know that he'll be there all day. Oh yeah, because by the 4th quarter, Florida was up by 3 possessions, and Devin Sanchez had this one dude locked away in a county jail. Because when the quarterback tried to throw his way, Devin went out there and said, "Give me that," coming up with his 2nd pick on the night. And this time he was taking it back for a big gain across the 50, and in the process doing enough to give Florida their first win of the season, as the Gators go on to close this game out 27-10. And Devin Sanchez led this defense with 2 interceptions and a few tackles, but he has a feeling that he'll have much better games going forward throughout his season. He still hadn't even come close to reaching his potential in college. So going into his first game of the regular season as a Gator, he was looking forward to showing what he can do in front of the home crowd, and hopefully he can lead Florida to another win as they're set to face off against California. Now, one thing about Devin is that he was definitely not perfect, and neither was his defense. They actually got ran all over throughout this opening drive, and California actually went on to score a touchdown to temporarily tie this game up. Soon, though, this defense was able to tighten up as they came up with a couple stops. But a determined California offense continued to drive down the field, and although the plays weren't to his side, this Devin Sanchez-led defense would let up another touchdown. In the second half, though, led by Devin Sanchez, this defense was able to give Florida a great cushion as he was out there making plays left and right. And by the end of this one, it came down to a 4th down and 10, where at this point, California was pretty much playing for pride. So for the first time all game, they decide to throw Devin Sanchez's way, and it clearly does not work out, as he comes up with a pick to close out this California drive and put an end to this game, as Florida comes up with a 31-22 victory. And thanks to DJ Lagway on offense and another great performance from this defense, Florida is starting their season at 2-0 before they head into a game against the top 5 ranked UAB. 82 overall UAB, huh? Now, Florida definitely felt pretty slighted that they were unranked, but this team was. But Devin Sanchez did not care because at least his team was undefeated still, unlike his old one. So now going on the road against the top 5 ranked team, the Florida Gators knew that if they ever want to make the top 25, they'll have to come away with an upset against the University of Alabama, Birmingham. Now, early on in this game, this defense was absolutely dominating. They were out here coming up with stops in the backfield. Devin Sanchez was out here saying, "Wang." He had this one return where he was able to turn around and flip the field completely. He was running towards the end zone, but ended up getting pushed out at the 1-yard line. And this Florida defense just had a whole lot of momentum going forward. Because although UAB was coming up with some pretty big plays, even making a reception where they got down to the goal line, it didn't really seem to matter as Devin Sanchez would snag the ball at the air, coming up with a pick on his own 1-yard line and taking some points off the board for UAB. They would eventually get the ball back though. But for whatever reason, it seems like they didn't learn their lesson though. God dang. Devin Sanchez has 3 interceptions through the first half alone. And this last one put him at 20 picks throughout his career already. Unfortunately, though, the offense would turn the ball over again, and UAB would get a field goal at the end of half to cut the Florida lead. Now, in the second half, Devin Sanchez was doing his best as he helped his team come up with multiple stops. But by the end of this game, with less than 10 seconds left, it actually turns out to be a play where Devin Sanchez would leave his man open for a touchdown that unfortunately would allow UAB to get back in this game with a 2-point conversion that sends it to overtime. And on this play, Devin thought he was about to make a big hit, but instead the receiver hits him with a hey, and pretty much had Devin Sanchez looking goofy as hell, man. He scored a touchdown that could put an end to this game. But it turns out that Devin Sanchez has other plans, because he was absolutely not trying to go out like that. So on this play where Florida now actually had the lead, Devin dropped back into coverage and he said, "Wang! Oh!" Coming up with a pick, and he didn't even got a return. He's just doing this for fun. But he gets a turnover that closes the game out against the top 5 ranked team and gives the Gators another win on their season, as Florida comes up with a 30-24 victory in overtime. And for the first time all season, Devin Sanchez wins player of the game with 4 picks. But it wasn't just that, man. He had a tackle for loss, a pass deflection. He had 6 tackles. This dude was all over the place. And it was exactly why he won SEC and National Defensive Player of the Week, reminding the entire country that he was, in fact, the best defensive back in college football. But if there were people who didn't believe him, he was going to have a chance to prove it again the following week, as Florida was going to have another game back at home, but this time against another top 25 ranked opponent. As in week 4, the Florida Gators are set to face off against the Oklahoma Sooners. Now, in a game where the Gators were a heavy underdog, early on it looks like Devin Sanchez better make some people a lot of money. It got so bad that Oklahoma was trying to get the refs to call cheap-ass flags on Devin, because not one of the receivers that came his way were able to get open. And even on plays where they thought they were going to be open, Devin Sanchez will be out there saying, "No!" Coming up with his first real pick of the day, and it looks like he better take this back for his first touchdown of the season. Oh no, this dude Devin Sanchez was different. Now it's too bad that the rest of his defense was also different in a different kind of way, as they let up a lot of yards in this game. Shoot, that didn't really seem to matter to Devin Sanchez, because backed up on his own goal line, he got another pick. Lurking this pass deep in his own territory, and out of nowhere, he is gone. It doesn't look like a single person for Oklahoma can catch him, as Devin Sanchez is taking this ball all the way down the sideline and across the goal line for a touchdown. His second one of the day, and he honestly can't even believe that he's doing it against one of the top 25 ranked teams in the country. Because just like that, Devin Sanchez had already done enough to put this game away, as Florida would go on to close this game out 24-14. And Devin Sanchez wins player of the game with 2 pick sixes. And this dude Devin Sanchez was so different, it was becoming national news that he was a dog. I mean, they had to let everybody know just in case they hadn't seen it. Now, Devin went on to win another player of the week, which was cool, but it was not cool that Florida was still unranked. But it was all good though, as Devin was actually working on hitting his top speed, and he had a feeling that going forward throughout the season, he was going to help this defense lock up everything. And hopefully he can help his team come away with wins, especially against SEC opponents, like the one in their next game against Missouri. Now, this game from the very start seemed to be very strange to Devin, because for the first time all season, his offense was struggling to put up points, and eventually the defense would show signs of struggle as well, as they let up a touchdown and go down 7-0 in this game. Now, everything seemed to be okay, as Devin Sanchez was doing a great job at mitigating yards when plays came his way. It almost seemed like he was one of the only guys on the whole team who showed up, because by the second half, the Gators were still down. And on this 3rd down and 10, Missouri felt like they had Devin Sanchez beat, so they were going to test him. But that turned out to be a stupid idea, as Devin Sanchez comes down with a pick in stride on his receiver, making a play that gives his team some life, and turns out to also be his 10th interception on the season already. But by the end of this game, with Florida's offense just not doing what it needs to, the defense would find themselves in a bad position where they allowed Missouri into field goal range, and unfortunately Florida would take their first loss of the season, falling to Missouri 13-10. And Devin felt pretty sick about this game because he knew that he did what he had to do. But at this point, he knows it's going to be a lot harder for his team to get into the top 25, especially when they had games like the ones that were coming up on their schedule. Because the Gators are heading into a stretch where they're about to play against a few top 25 ranked teams, including their next one on the road against one of the top ranked teams in the country, the Alabama Crimson Tide. Now, for the first time all season, this turned out to be a game where Devin Sanchez was not having to do much early on, as his defense came up with a pick 6 to put them up 7 in the first quarter. But these Alabama referees were definitely cheating in this game. They called a penalty on Devin Sanchez for just trying to get off a block. Like, I'm sorry, I didn't know that was a legal contact. Yeah, it turns out that ball does not lie though, as Florida now had a 14-point lead before they came up with another pick that was going to the crib for another touchdown. Now, Devin Sanchez did have an impact on this game as he was coming up with a few tackles, but he definitely appreciates how much the rest of his defense dominated. And by the end of the third quarter, they had already done enough to put an end to this game, as Florida goes on to blow out Alabama on the road 28-0. But despite being 5-1 and having beaten multiple top 25 ranked teams, the Florida Gators were still unranked. But that seemed to be okay because all that did was just motivate this Florida team. And they were prepared to go throughout the rest of their season proving to everybody that they were more than just a top 25 team, starting in their next game against Vanderbilt. Now, one game after Devin Sanchez had let the rest of his defense take over, he knew that any chance he got, he was going to come out here and say, "Mwang," as he came up with a diving pick early on in the back of the end zone, and just like that, he's already setting the tone for the rest of his team. But in another game where the offense was struggling, led by Devin Sanchez, this defense had no problem. And unfortunately for Vanderbilt, they are seriously struggling to put up some points in this game. And it turns out that it wasn't just because of Devin Sanchez, because another defensive back would also come up with an interception, as Cornerback McClain actually hauls in this pick, and he's able to take it all the way back to the crib for a score, putting up points that does enough to put this game away. As Florida comes out with another victory thanks to another Devin Sanchez-led performance. And at this point in the season, Florida is finally ranked, which a lot of Florida fans were excited about. But they were also excited about the fact that Devin Sanchez was now the single-season interception leader, breaking a Florida record already with 5 games left in the season. But at the moment, Devin Sanchez wasn't worried about breaking no records, because now that they are finally ranked, he's just trying to help his team win as many games as possible. Because after a bad end to his freshman season at Ohio State, he truly believes that the Florida Gators have everything it takes to make a deep playoff run. But he knows that he and his team have to prove that they deserve to get there first. Now, throughout the season, teams have rarely thrown Devin Sanchez's way, but when they do, he is often coming up with a pick. And this game against South Carolina was no different, because by the end of this one, it was already 28-14, and I know South Carolina's trying to come back, but Devin Sanchez is not having that. Coming up with his 3rd or 4th pick in the season in his own end zone, taking points off the board for South Carolina and pretty much putting this game away. But props to them, they get the ball back and they are trying to go for it on 4th down. For some reason, though, they decide to throw back to Devin Sanchez, and he makes them pay. I mean, I don't know what the hell they were thinking, man. He came up with 2 picks in the last minute and a half of the game. And this one here would be enough to give Florida another victory on the season, as they close this game out 28-14 thanks to a big game from DJ Lagway. And that's the kind of thing that Devin Sanchez likes to see, man, because he knows that he's going to do what he has to do on defense. And he genuinely feels like if both sides of the ball can keep this level of play up, then he doesn't care who or where they play, there isn't a single team in the country who can beat them. Not even on the road against the Georgia Bulldogs. Now, going into this one, it was a very highly anticipated matchup, but early on it became very clear who was going to pull ahead early in this game. Because all throughout the first half, Georgia was actually shooting themselves in the foot, and it actually took the Bulldogs all the way until the 4th quarter to get down to the goal line, where they eventually did come up with a touchdown to bring them back in this game. But by the end of this one, even after getting themselves into field goal range, it turns out that their kicker would miss and Florida would take the 10-7 victory on the road. And this was a game where Georgia didn't even bother to throw Devin Sanchez's way, but he did come up with a few tackles though. But regardless, after beating the last remaining ranked team on their schedule, the Gators felt extremely good going back into another game at home against Arkansas. Now, early on, this was another game where Devin Sanchez was not having to do much, as his teammate comes up with a pick to set the tone for the Gators. Devin did have an impact later on though, as he helped force a fumble on this guy, and the Gators would pick it up, causing a turnover and allowing the team to take a 2-possession lead going into the 4th quarter. Where after Florida comes up with another interception from Cornerback McClain, they were picking up another win against an SEC opponent, as they win this one 27-14, and at this point the Florida Gators are looking like an absolute powerhouse. Even in games like their next one against Auburn, where their offense had struggled greatly throughout the entire game, their defense had remained key to the team's success, as by the end of this one it was literally 7-0, and despite letting up over 200 yards passing, the Gators had come up with a shutout at home against the Tigers, which eventually would lead us into the last game of the regular season, where all Florida had to do was just close out the season against an in-state rival, the Florida State Seminoles. Now, over the past few weeks, Devin Sanchez hadn't made a huge impact on defense, but to start this game, he was, as he came up with an interception early on that turned out to be his 30th pick of his career. This kid wasn't even 20 years old yet, and he was proving to be one of the best quarterbacks in all of college football history. But it was not just because he was out there catching interceptions. Devin Sanchez was very physical, and he was definitely willing to say shablaka, as he forces a fumble, and his defense comes up with another big turnover, which should give his team a lot of momentum, but unfortunately the offense is not performing well. I mean, they hadn't even been past midfield yet. So Devin Sanchez actually came up with the idea to say "Wang" and come up with a pick in Florida State territory, allowing his offense to have a ton of momentum going forward. Because now by the fourth quarter, it is 13-0. But with Florida State believing they still have a chance to come back in this game, they decide to throw it to Devin Sanchez's side, and it gets tipped and picked off by Devin Sanchez, coming up with a turnover that puts an end to this game, but finally puts an end to the regular season, as the Gators close the season out with a 13-0 victory, shutting out back-to-back opponents largely thanks to a Devin Sanchez masterclass. Dude had 3 interceptions and a forced fumble, so it was no surprise to anybody that he would go on to win National Defensive Player of the Week, closing the season out with more proof that he was the best defensive player in the country. But he would have one more game to prove it, as he was set to match up against Texas in the SEC Championship game. So Devin worked as hard as he always had to prepare, because he knew that this might be the biggest game of his career. He had a chance to lead another team back to the college football playoffs, but this time with a first-round bye. And he knew that the way that he, DJ Lagway, and the rest of the Florida Gators had been playing, that they had a great chance against Arch Manning and the Texas Longhorns. Now, early on in this game, both teams were struggling on offense, but after Florida was eventually able to come up with a stop in the red zone, Texas put up the first points of the game with a field goal. But with the Florida offense not playing as well as they had been lately, Devin knew that he had to help him out and make a play. So on this one, he baited Arch Manning before snagging his ball at the air, coming up with an interception, and then he immediately reverses field for a huge gain that goes deep into Longhorn territory. And it becomes very clear to the entire stadium what kind of game this might be, as this Gator defense led by Devin Sanchez continued to make plays, ultimately holding Texas to another field goal to close out the first half. But eventually things would begin to change a little bit, as for the first time in a while, Devin Sanchez was getting cooked. Like I'm talking about some shrimp fried rice, boy. He let up a touchdown that allowed Texas to take the lead. But by the end of this game, with less than 2 minutes left, Florida would take the lead back. Unfortunately, though, Texas was driving downfield looking to send this game into overtime. On the 2nd down to 10, though, I think Devin Sanchez realized that he don't want to play in overtime. He wants to find a way to put an end to this game right now. So on this play, he sees the running back motion out, and oh yeah, you know what time it is. Devin Sanchez runs right up to him and says, "Shablang, boy, what's up, boy?" Devin Sanchez just knocked this dude the fuck out, and then immediately picks up the ball, not only securing the win for Florida, but Devin Sanchez finally does enough to get another team back to the college football playoffs, as the Gators closed this game out 17-14. And once again, it was definitely led by Devin Sanchez, who made plays all throughout the game, helping Florida win their first SEC championship since 2008. And this is in a year where Devin Sanchez has 19 interceptions before the playoffs start. And I don't even know if Devin himself realized just how great he had been. He set a national single-season record for the most interceptions in a year. But that was nothing compared to the fact that he was now the all-time career leader in interceptions. And at this point, it is widely accepted that he is one of the best defensive players in the history of college football. And it was no surprise to anybody that his head coach and defensive coordinator would get a lot of credit after the season. But there were definitely people who were upset that Devin Sanchez did not win the Heisman, as it went to Dante Moore out of Oregon, who definitely had a pretty good season. But Devin Sanchez, who wins back-to-back Defensive Player of the Year awards, well, he just had a better year. So it especially didn't make sense to anybody that he wasn't even in the running for Heisman. They even had Decorian Moore's replacement up there since he had taken the year off before the draft. And Devin didn't really mind that because he knows that defensive players don't often win the Heisman. But he was not happy to find out that he wasn't selected to be an All-American in any capacity, not even within his own conference. So at this point, Devin was extra motivated to work even harder going into the playoffs. He definitely felt a little bit slighted and realized that he deserved a lot more credit for the season than he got. So he's just extra locked in now going into the college football playoffs, because he wants to help the Gators come away with their first ever playoff win. But in order to do that, he's going to have to help the Gators take down fake-ass Patrick Mahomes and Nebraska. Now in this game against fake-ass Patrick Mahomes, Devin Sanchez was not having to do much, because after already throwing one pick to the defense, it turns out that fake-ass Patrick Mahomes was very generous, as he throws another one in the second quarter to put an end to their drive and allow Florida to take a 2-possession lead. But if that wasn't already enough, fake-ass Patrick Mahomes was throwing his third pick of the quarter. And at this point, it was clear that Florida had a ton of momentum going into the second half. Nebraska did not get too far past midfield until the end of the third quarter, where eventually they would come up with a touchdown. But by then, it seems like Florida had already done enough to put this game away, as Florida was coming up with a victory in the playoffs, and this was actually thanks to another defensive player on the team. Devin Sanchez did do a great job in the tackling department, as he was now helping the Gators get to the next round of the playoffs, where it turns out in their next one, the entire state of Florida was going to be watching, because it turns out that two of the best teams in the state were about to match up, as the Florida Gators were set to face off against the Miami Hurricanes. Now this was another game early on where Devin Sanchez was not having to do much for his defense. But towards the end of the first half, he realized that maybe he relied on them too much, as he was once again getting cooked for a long play downfield that goes for a touchdown, allowing Miami to tie this game up going into the second half. But Devin Sanchez did not come this far to let his team down. So the very next time his team comes out on defense, Devin Sanchez goes up to this dude and says, "Shablaka," just smacking the dog shit out of him, and just like that, Florida picks it up. And it looked like the Gators were going to get a ton of momentum going forward. Unfortunately, though, that would not be the case. As by the fourth quarter, with Devin Sanchez still feeling like he had to make up for the play earlier, well, he ended up not only going offsides, but he left his man wide open and allowed Miami to go in for another touchdown to take the lead. So now all of a sudden things were not looking good for Florida. But they would end up tying this game back up. And by the fourth quarter, Devin Sanchez was out there helping his team come up with a stop in the backfield, ultimately sending this game into overtime. Where even though Devin was playing great defense, Florida would still let up a touchdown. And it looked like the momentum was on the Hurricane side. Eventually, though, this game would come down to this 2-point conversion, where Miami actually had a chance to keep this game going. But they hand the ball off to their running back, and he gets stopped short. And just like that, the Florida Gators go on to win this game. I mean, that all happened so fast they couldn't even process the fact that they were now heading to the national championship, which is somewhere this team hadn't been since they had Tim Tebow at quarterback. But this is exactly what Devin Sanchez always wanted. He came into college with the mindset that he would one day want to win a national championship. And now, after transferring to the Florida Gators, he might now finally have a chance to do so. But he would be doing this against the quarterback who not only stole his Heisman Trophy, but against the team that had knocked his team out in the previous season. As in the national championship, the Florida Gators will be set to face off against the Oregon Ducks. Now, early on in this game, Devin Sanchez was feeling different. He was still very upset that this team had knocked him out of the playoffs as a freshman. So on this opening drive, Devin Sanchez made sure to read this route, and he ended up saying, "Wang!" Coming up with a diving interception on Dante Moore. But he's out there letting the entire crowd know that he is nowhere near done yet. Because in this game, man, his defense was coming out to play. They were out there coming up with multiple stops, even though their offense wasn't putting up any points. So at some point, Devin Sanchez realized that he might have to change that. So on 2nd and 13, Devin Sanchez sees the receiver break to the outside before he says, "Give me that!" Coming up with another interception, and just like that, Devin Sanchez is racing down the sideline. And there's nobody who's going to catch him as he scores the first touchdown of the game for either team. And I don't know if y'all see that, but that man Petty, he doing a Heisman pose right behind Dante Moore. Yeah, by the way, I don't know what's going on here, man. These two freaky as hell, boy. What the hell? But coming back on defense, it looks like Devin Sanchez had motivated his squad, as they not only force a fumble, but they come up with a turnover to give Florida a ton of momentum, ultimately allowing the offense to put up a touchdown before and after half. Now taking the 21-0 lead going into the third quarter, where even still, Dante Moore is not looking like a Heisman Trophy winner, now throwing his 4th pick of the game. And to a lot of people, this game was already pretty much over. But with around 2 minutes left, Oregon did still have life. And they actually had a play where the receiver had cooked Devin Sanchez and made a reception over the middle as he head towards the end zone. But nah, see, Devin Sanchez wasn't going to have that. So he stayed right behind him before raising his fist up and saying, "Wang!" Oh! That boy Devin Sanchez knocked that shit out, and Florida recovers. Not only doing enough to put an end to this drive, but allowing the Florida Gators to go on to win the national championship. They have finally done it. Devin Sanchez just helped lead the Gators to their first championship ring in almost 20 years. Doing it all while taking down a fake-ass Heisman Trophy winner and the team that put an end to his freshman season. And of course, Devin Sanchez would go on to win Player of the Game. But the most important thing to him was that now he was officially a national champion. And after an incredible sophomore season with the Gators, people were able to look back and see that Devin Sanchez maybe had one of, if not the best defensive season in all of college football history, as he ended this season with 21 interceptions, averaging more than 1 pick a game on his way to leading his team to a championship ring. Which brings us to today, where after an exceptional 2 seasons with Ohio State and now Florida, where it turns out that Roger Goodell has made a rule change just for Devin Sanchez. Hold on, let me read this real quick. Because Devin Sanchez is an absolute certified ball hog demon, we will make the exception for him to enter his name into the NFL draft. Well, hey, bro, you know what? I'm not gonna lie, Devin Sanchez has been ready to go pro. And he knew that it was now time to take his talents to the NFL. And now that he's finally on his way to the league, I mean, many people already knew that he was going to be a top 10 pick. He didn't even have to go to the combine, but he decided to do his 40. And even though he slipped at the start of his 40-yard dash, look at it, he still went on to run a 4.38. And after that, the scouts said they pretty much seen enough. And at this point, they just want to get into some interviews with him, and it turns out that he did pretty well, solidifying his position as a top 10 pick in the upcoming draft. And it didn't take long into the first round for Devin Sanchez to find out that he would be staying in Florida. As it turns out that Mike McDaniel and the Dolphins want him down there in Miami. So with the 6th overall pick in the NFL draft, the Miami Dolphins selected Devin Sanchez. And like LeBron, this man is now taking his talents to Miami. And now that Devin Sanchez is finally a Dolphin, they actually let him wear his favorite number 6 for the first time since high school. And they did not waste no time with the man. They couldn't wait to see what he can do going into a first preseason game, as they were now set to face off against the Atlanta Falcons. Now in this game, Miami didn't really get a chance to see what Devin Sanchez could do, as on this play, Kyle Pitts turns into the Incredible Hulk and finds his way across the goal line for a touchdown. But you know what, man, Mike McDaniel figured he already seen enough and decided to take Devin out the game. He knows that his young cornerback will be ready for the regular season, as it's now time to head into their first game. Where at home, Devin Sanchez and the Miami Dolphins will be facing off against Trevor Lawrence and the Jacksonville Jaguars. Now on his very first play of his NFL career, Devin Sanchez knew that he wanted to make a big play. So on this one, he decided to drop back into coverage and say, "Wang!" coming up with the pick. And now Devin is bringing his team across the 50. This kid was making an impact for his team already, and the entire stadium knew that he was only just getting started. Now, one thing Devin Sanchez knew that he was going to have to improve on at this level was his tackling. But otherwise, he and this defense had been playing well all game until the second half, because they did eventually start to break and let up some points, as the Jaguars would now make this a 2-possession ball game, bringing us to the fourth quarter on the goal line, where Trevor Lawrence had once again decided to test Devin Sanchez, as he comes up with his second interception of the game. And just like that, he has led his team to their first victory of the season, as Miami comes up with a 28-10 win, mostly because of their defense led by a young rookie Devin Sanchez, who at practice the following week was already being questioned by some reporters and being praised for his impressive performance in his first game. Unfortunately for the rest of the league, he was nowhere near his potential. But knowing that the NFL has a long season, Devin was just looking forward to taking it one game at a time. And he was going to try to help Miami win their next one against the Buffalo Bills. Now, it did not take long for Devin Sanchez and his defense to start having some problems, as it was pretty clear that they were playing a much better team than they had the previous week. Despite the fact that Devin was doing his job, Buffalo would find themselves right back down towards the goal line, where they ended up coming up with another touchdown, already putting up more points on Miami than they saw in week 1. But soon Miami's defense would turn it around, as they came up with a safety, putting their offense in a position to eventually tie this game up at 17. We're now in the fourth quarter. Once again, Josh Allen just keeps making plays to Keon Coleman, finding him in the end zone for another touchdown here in the fourth quarter. Another Miami offense put the defense in a bad position, as they give the ball right back. But down at the goal line, the Dolphins come up with their second safety of the game, coming up with a play that could have gave the team some life. But unfortunately, this game still resulted in their first loss of the season, going down 24-19 against the Bills. And it seems like this is where Devin Sanchez would start to see how different the NFL was from college. Because as Miami was heading into their next game against Seattle, the Dolphins were out there still struggling. And it wasn't until a play where Devin Sanchez was playing great man coverage and came up with a pick. And on this one, it turns out he has a ton of room, as he was able to take it all the way back to the crib for a touchdown. But unfortunately, despite the great play by Devin, Miami would go on to drop back-to-back games, as they lose this one 24-7 and now drop to 1-2 on the season. And at this point, Devin Sanchez was dealing with the stark contrast of going from a national champion to a squad that could potentially end up being a losing team. But he was looking to help them turn it around, as he was heading into their next game against the Titans. And actually, this was another game where Devin Sanchez would come up with another pick, but although he would go on to set them up with great field position early on, this game just never seemed to be in the Dolphins' favor, as there was often times where Devin Sanchez was out there looking goofy as hell, like, what is this? What is he doing? But this just resulted in the game heading into overtime, where the Tennessee Titans would go on to score a touchdown and give the Dolphins their third straight loss. And despite the fact that Devin Sanchez had played pretty well so far, it was expected that he was going to have some haters. And at this point, he had a lot of people dogpiling on him and the Dolphins. But eventually, Devin Sanchez would come to the realization that he would have to put his team on his back. He was going to have to try to unlock a new level in his game. And that would all start here in his team's next one against the Patriots. And in this one, Devin Sanchez was learning how to become a smart tackler. As if you notice here, he didn't actually come up with a tackle himself, but he pushed the guy behind the first down. And that had actually allowed his team to come up with the stop. giving them a ton of momentum in a game that led them to a big lead in the fourth quarter. And with New England actually looking like the worst team in the league, this turned out to be an easy 21-6 victory for the Dolphins. But this was a game where Devin Sanchez didn't really have to do anything to come up with a win. And of course, because of that, he would have people talking crazy about him like Michael Pittman. And obviously all that did was just motivate Devin Sanchez to work harder on the field. And he was ready to do whatever it takes to help his team come away with another victory on the road against the Colts. And after working on his tackling a little bit more, it seems like Devin Sanchez can now say shablaka, as he lit this one dude up like a Christmas tree. But nah, see, he was not done there. Because although it was a game where Michael Pittman was cooking up Jalen Ramsey, Devin Sanchez would get back at him for talking crazy by saying shablow. And this continued all game as Devin proceeded to knock Michael Pittman into next Sunday and ultimately helped his team come away with a 24-21 victory. And this was actually a game where Devin Sanchez led the team with 5 tackles. And he continued to show his ability to tackle in the following week against the Cardinals, where it looks like he was giving these dudes early onset CTE in the game, but the Miami Dolphins would go on to win, closing this game out 13-6 in a game where Devin Sanchez once again didn't really have to do too much. Teams realized that it was best to probably not throw his way, and that's what was contributing to Miami's 3-game winning streak. And at this point, the vibes in the locker room were about as high as they were around the city, as Devin Sanchez was now getting a ton of love from the fans. But now the Dolphins were just focused on trying to keep their winning streak alive, as they were about to head into a rematch against the division rival, the Buffalo Bills. Now early on in this one, things were looking decent for Miami as Devin Sanchez was trying to set the tone. But it didn't take long for Josh Allen to dot this defense up again as he got his team across the goal line for a touchdown. And this is actually Keon Coleman's 3rd one of the season against the Dolphins. Immediately after that though, the Dolphins started to really play well on defense, holding the Dolphins to only 10 points by the 4th quarter, where Devin Sanchez would actually go out there and say, "Wang," coming up with a pick. And now he has set his offense up with excellent field position and a chance to take the lead, but they don't. And now on a play where Devin Sanchez takes a huge gamble, it does not pay off, as he lets up a pass in his zone that goes all the way to the end zone for a touchdown and ultimately results in the Dolphins losing another game, dropping their 2nd game to the Bills, this time by 1 point. And it seems like this loss would send Miami into another slide, as they came out here in a game against the Rams where Jalen Ramsey was getting fried against his old team. Despite that though, Miami by the end of it did still have a chance, especially with Devin Sanchez coming out here and making big plays in the backfield. But regardless of the improvements that Devin made to his game so far this season, he couldn't stop his team from losing yet another game, dropping this one 21-14 to the Rams. And regardless of the fact that Devin is currently the league leader in interceptions, the Miami Dolphins are looking like one of the worst teams in the AFC. Sitting at 4-5 in the season, they had to find a way to get back on track. And heading into the next game, they were going to have to do it against one of the best teams in the AFC, as they were heading back home to match up against the Las Vegas Raiders. Now against the Raiders, it was clear that this team was not on their A game today, because for a team that was 6-3, they still had 0 points by the end of the 2nd quarter, which is also exactly where Devin Sanchez decided to say, "Wang," coming up with another interception on his season. And he would give his team a ton of momentum going forward as they would come away with a 14-9 victory. And I'm not gonna lie, man, despite only having a 5-5 record, there were a lot of people around the country who already felt like Devin Sanchez had earned the DPOY. And I don't know if you can even blame him. This kid just had a different kind of mindset that allowed him to be better than everybody else. And he was looking forward to showing that as he continued throughout his season, starting in his next game against the worst team in the league, the New England Patriots. Now for a while in this one, it was a pretty close game, but it seems like things began to change after Devin Sanchez helps his team come up with a big play in the backfield, bringing them to a 3rd down where his defense would ultimately come up with another stop. And it turns out that was already enough to put this game away, as the Dolphins would come up with a 10-7 victory. And they just couldn't wait to keep this train rolling heading into their next game against the Packers. And this was another one where once again Devin Sanchez was coming up with big plays in open space, helping his team come up with a stop in a game where they would maintain the lead all the way until the end of the 3rd quarter, which is actually where Devin Sanchez would come up with his first true pass breakup of the season. All year, teams have been avoiding passing Devin Sanchez's way, as it was clear that throwing to the other side made it easy for opposing offenses to come up with big plays. And despite the fact that the Packers would actually put up a pretty decent amount of points against the Dolphins, Miami's offense would eventually come up clutch as they came up with a 21-17 victory. And at this point in the season, with being 7-5, the Dolphins were in a pretty decent position to potentially make the playoffs. All they had to do was just stay on track going into a big game against the division rival, the New York Jets. Now, unfortunately, this was a game where the Jets were pretty much cooking Miami all game, The Dolphins had no answer for the running game, and it was pretty clear. And despite Devin Sanchez's efforts to say Shablaka to Breece Hall, he continuously guided his team downfield as the Jets would eventually throw a touchdown to take the lead. Luckily though, Miami would force this game to go into overtime, where Devin Sanchez was out here knocking these dudes out like Mike Tyson in 1987. But unfortunately, he could not change that for a big part of this game, his defense was getting cooked. And as the Jets got down towards the goal line, it really started to look bleak for Miami. But everything would change when Devin dropped back into coverage and said, "Wango!" And after snatching this dude's ankle and then breaking off a tackle, this dude was up out of there. Devin Sanchez had nobody in front of him as he was racing his way downfield, eventually crossing over the goal line for a touchdown in overtime, and doing enough to give his team their 4th straight victory. As Miami would close this one out 19-13, and all of a sudden this team looks like they might have a chance to be some contenders. And the way Devin Sanchez had been playing all season, man, there was speculation that he might be the inspiration behind Jordan Peele's next movie, as they were coming out to a sequel to him, and it seemed like Devin Sanchez just fit the part. Now in Miami's next game, they would actually go into another overtime, where this time they were not so fortunate, as Devin Sanchez actually gets cooked up like some pork fried rice in this play, letting up a touchdown that results in Miami dropping their 6th game of the season. But despite losing a handful of games throughout the year, Devin Sanchez still had faith in his team, and he truly felt like they had what it takes to make the playoffs as they were still in good position. But one thing Devin Sanchez knew was that he had to be better, so he was working on his hit power in hopes to maybe cause more turnovers, and he was really hoping that he would be able to cause some going into Miami's next game, as they would be back at home facing off against one of the best teams in the league, the San Francisco 49ers. Now unfortunately in this one, Jalen Ramsey had been struggling worse than he had all season. Like, I don't know if this dude came to the game drunk or something, but like, what is he doing? Like, bro, get off the ground. Like, nah, see, they were doing Jalen Ramsey so crazy early on in this game that it was just baffling, bro. It got to a point where they were just being disrespectful. Like, ain't no way, bro. Come on now. Devin Sanchez had to go to the replay system to see it himself, because I'm not gonna lie, bro, that was crazy right there. But not as crazy as Devin saying Shablaka to Christian McCaffrey. Yeah, boy, Devin angry now. He came out here on the very next play and helped his team come up with the stop on 3rd down to hold them to 3. Eventually leading us to a tie game where Jalen Ramsey was still getting fried, and this eventually just led to the Niners scoring an easy touchdown to put them up by 7 before half. Now eventually Miami was able to tie this game up, but it seems like everything would change in a play where Devin Sanchez said Shablow to Brock Purdy, knocking this dude's lights out, forcing his first fumble of the season and coming up with a sack. Sadly though, the Niners had actually called in a favor to the refs, asking him to call flags on Devin if he ever makes a big play. But there was nothing they can do a couple plays later when Devin Sanchez had laid out Christian McCaffrey, forcing another fumble that gave his team the ball. And after this turnover, the Dolphins had all the momentum as they would go on to win this game, closing this one out 23-17 against one of the best teams in the league. And a huge part of their victory was thanks to their rookie Devin Sanchez. And honestly, bro, it's crazy to think about how this kid is this young and he's already a superstar. So much so to the point where this kid is already getting put in movies. And Jalen Ramsey actually hit him up about a new trailer that came out, and Devin just couldn't wait to see it, man. Hold on, let me check this out real quick.
Show me.
Hey bro, what the fuck? This man Devin a demon on and off the field. But he's not really too worried about the movie right now, as he's about to head into his next game against the Sean Cosby and the Cleveland Browns. Now in this game, unfortunately, the Browns offense was clicking on all cylinders, and it turns out that it was pretty much the exact opposite for Miami as they continuously gave the ball back. But all that seemed to change as Devin Sanchez would send Deshaun Watson back to a massage parlor, because we know he's gonna be hurting after fumbling the ball and turning it over to Miami. But as great of a play as this was for Miami, they would still end up down by the 4th quarter, as their offense was just not able to do anything at all in this game. It was clear that they needed some help. So on this play, Devin Sanchez decided to say, "Shablang!" just absolutely disintegrating the running back as he forces another turnover, giving the ball back to the offense, and this defense is hyped. For whatever reason though, it seems like Tua is mad that he has to go back out on the field. And I'm not gonna lie, man, Devin Sanchez had a bad feeling that he might not be able. Yep, it turns out that his offense just gave the ball right back. And now with 1 minute left in this game, it seems like it might be over. But on this play, Deshaun Watson decided to scramble out the pocket. And oh shit, Devin Sanchez sees him coming. Unlike the woman at the massage parlors who didn't see him coming. And you know what, Devin feels like he might have to make him pay for that. So on this play, Devin decides to smack Deshaun Watson, forcing the ball loose as it pops out in the open. And now Jalen Ramsey is there to pick it up. And now out of nowhere, Jalen and Devin Sanchez are running down the sideline, And it is looking like an absolute miracle in Cleveland, as with less than a minute left, Jalen Ramsey is able to take this one for a touchdown, putting up points that gave the team the lead in the final moments of the game, and does enough to give them the 14-13 victory. This dude, Devin Sanchez, played absolutely amazing in this game. Now, he didn't come up with any interceptions, but he forced 3 turnovers, coming up huge in one of the biggest games of his team's season, and it was no surprise that he was getting a ton of notoriety after the game. But the best part about this win is that Miami would find out that they actually clinched a playoff berth, and if the Bills lose in the final game of the season, they might actually have a chance to come out on top in their division. Now, this would be a huge turnaround for Miami, as at one point they were literally 5-5 on the season. But now, with the chance to take the AFC East crown, Miami was focused on coming away with a victory in their last game of the regular season, where now they will be set to go on the road to face off against the New York Jets. Now, in this one, Devin Sanchez was determined to set the tone early, forcing a fumble that luckily for the Jets went out of bounds. And in one where Devin Sanchez was completely locked in, it was a matter of time before he would go out there and say, "Wang!" coming up with an interception. And now there was nobody in front of him as he was racing down the sideline, and soon enough he was easily making his way towards the end zone for a touchdown, coming up with his second pick 6 of the season against the Jets. But as crazy as it might seem, man, Devin Sanchez felt like he truly was not done yet, because by the time the third quarter came around with Miami still having the lead, Devin Sanchez would actually snag another pick. And once again, there was nobody in front. Hey, what the fuck? But there was nobody in front of him as he was just gliding his way across the goal line for his second touchdown of the day, putting up a score that not only gave his team the 2-possession lead, but actually was enough to put an end to the regular season, as Miami comes up with a victory in their final game of the year, and it absolutely could not have been done without Devin Sanchez. This dude damn near scored as many touchdowns as the offense, and he was pretty much just as valuable as the entire offense as a whole the way that he played all year, ending the season off with the second most tackles on the team, 9 interceptions, 7 forced fumbles, and 5 tackles for loss. This kid was different, and there was a reason why he would be in the playoffs for his 3rd straight season, this time in the NFL. And it's funny because it would actually be his 3rd game against the division rival, where in their first playoff matchup they would actually have to go on the road, in the snow, and face off against the Buffalo Bills. Early on in this one, everything was looking great for Miami. This defense was playing well, including Devin Sanchez, who came up with a pass breakup. Unfortunately, though, it would not be long after where they saw exactly how they lost to the Bills twice already this season. They had a former MVP, Josh Allen, who was cooking this team up all game, coming up with a touchdown in the first half before Miami would actually come out and take the lead. But then immediately the Bills just start frying this defense all over again, when already it seemed like there was really nothing that Devin Sanchez could do. But there was definitely nothing he can do when he was being taken off the field, as Buffalo would go on to take the lead. Now, eventually, though, this game would end up pretty close. And the way that Devin Sanchez was playing, it allowed him to really be able to see exactly what was going on from the other side. He knew exactly what kind of plays the Bills were going to run, and that helped his defense come up with stops, allowing his offense to get the ball back, but they could only put up 3 points, leading us to 1 minute left in this game where the Bills are just trying to run the clock out. Because on this play, he finds James Cook and says, "Shablaka!" smacking that ball loose, and sadly, Jordan Poyer actually picks it up and goes out of bounds. If only Devin Sanchez would have been able to pick it up, he might have taken it to the crib. But instead, we have to really hope that Miami can go down the field and get the job done, and unfortunately, they can't, as the Dolphins would go on to lose in the wild card round, 16-17. And despite having an incredible performance in this game and in his rookie year, Devin Sanchez's first season in the league was now officially over. Despite that, though, Devin Sanchez knew that he wanted to be back next year, as he truly did believe in this team. And in a season where he not only won Rookie of the Year, but Defensive Player of the Year, becoming only the 2nd player to ever do so since 1981, when Lawrence Taylor won it. While it was safe to say that Devin Sanchez felt great about his future in Miami, it was clear that he had potential to become one of the greatest defensive players of all time. And after starting off his career with Ohio State, heading to Florida, and now being in Miami, Devin Sanchez honestly believed that he could one day become exactly that. But this was the story of Devin Sanchez. If you want to see more videos like this, be sure to get this one to 1,000 likes and subscribe to the channel down below. Also, be sure to comment down below what else you guys want to see next, and YouTube thinks you'll like one of these other stories until the next one comes out. If you got to this point in the video, just know that I appreciate you more than you'll ever know. I hope you all have a great rest of your week, and other than that, I'm gonna catch you guys next time.